Amen, amen. So, I'm going to give a teaching that comes from my son Jaron Berman's mouth. It's written in his words, and he was not able to be here to deliver it, but I am sharing it, and I apologize, I'm using a computer to share it, because I brought my home computer and it can't print to the work computer, and that is such is working from home and an office. That's what happens. So I apologize that I'm using a computer. I was talking to Jaron about this morning. He wrote it and we were talking about it. And you write what you know and what you feel and what you think, and I think he was writing this to me. With some criticism and love, fair enough. Jaron is my son who's 21 years old. He's a college student, and he used to be a teacher here for the Devar Torah part of Sunday school. He used to help kids figure out their Torah and their teaching, and I asked him to share his Torah with me. And I also, apologize is not the right word, but I do get a little verklempt because sometimes words are hard and they ring true, and this is not easy. These are not easy words, and some of them are funny, some are easy, some are not. So with that, a teaching about this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion that begins the book of Exodus, Shemot, or names, deals with many incidents that are famous in their own right. Baby Moses set adrift in the Nile, his later flight from Egypt, the burning bush, and Moses' eventual return to Eretz Mitzrayim to carry out God's orders to free the Jewish people. I'm, Jaron says, not going to talk about any of those. Instead, I'm going to talk about an account that appears in the final lines of the portion, in which Pharaoh, having heard for the first time from Moses and Aaron to let the Israelites go, responds by going to his taskmasters and ordering them to tell their slaves that they shall no longer be provided with straw for their brick making. They are to seek it out themselves, however they can manage, but still must meet an identical quota of bricks at the end of the day. When the Israelites inevitably fail to meet this quota, they are beaten. When Pharaoh is confronted with this matter, he deflects the blame immediately, calling the Jews shirkers who have failed to meet the quota only because they spend too much time making sacrifices. While certainly not known for coming off well in any part of the Torah, this incident stands out in terms of Pharaoh not simply being cruel, but also ignorant. He seems to be doing the equivalent of hitting somebody in the leg and then complaining that they can't keep up with you on a jog. Okay, you respond, turns out that Pharaoh's a bad person, I wouldn't have guessed. There's certainly no other evidence of that elsewhere in the Torah. What is the point in simply highlighting another aspect of his malice? To which I, Jaron, will respond, fair enough. But what I would like to argue is that we ourselves can sometimes fall into the trap of acting like Pharaoh in this instance. While I would hope that we are not the ones causing injury in the first place, we can sometimes find ourselves judging others without understanding how they ended up in that situation in the first place. We are almost at the completion of 2 years living in a pandemic. Over 800,000 people in the US have tragically lost their lives to the virus, and we have all taken radical steps in each of our lives to protect ourselves and our loved ones. Simply gazing around this room as you sit separated into pods with masks on our faces and air filters dotting the room, we have all changed our lives to adapt. We have given up time with loved ones, forced ourselves to grapple with new technology in order to continue with any parts of normal life that we can salvage. And yet, while unpleasant at times, we do so at the end of the day resolute, because we know that we are each doing our small part to save lives. We know that normal lies at the end of a road paved with 1,000,000 tiny sacrifices. And that in each little way, we are working to help end this ordeal. He says, I think I speak for many of us then that it can spark great frustration when someone is seen blatantly disregarding the rules. To defy public health guidelines, to shirk off personal responsibility for the safety of others can be disheartening. And it is truly difficult to bring ourselves to empathize with such an individual. For while you have made drastic changes to your life in the names of protecting those around you, they might have done the opposite and selfishly decided that they need not do their part to try and bring an end to the pandemic. I think, he says, however, even if difficult, such empathy is essential. To be clear, I do think that this behavior is incredibly self-centered, and as we try to gain understanding for this individual, I want to make sure to acknowledge that at the end of the day, the buck stops with each one of us to make the right decision. With that said, let's try to do something uncomfortable. Put yourself in the mindset of that person and try to understand what led them to that moment. Maybe the answer really is pure selfishness, a core lack of consideration for others. In fact, I'm sure for some individuals this is indeed the case, but I have a hard time imagining it is the case for everyone. I would like to instead push deeper and say that for many of those who refute public health guidelines, in their view, it is rather the reasonable thing to do. This is a deeply uncomfortable notion. The pandemic is not over by any stretch of the imagination. COVID cases are on the rise throughout the country, but there are circles in which this reality is distorted. There are online commentators who peddle ignorance, sharing a willful denial of this basic reality. And to a dedicated follower, to ignore public guidelines is only natural, for to them, the pandemic is not the reality we know to be true, but a distorted image in which the disease is an imagined boogeyman and the science unsubstantiated. When deprived of the truth, it is quite easy to act in ways that appear selfish. This, however, is where I want to caution us to not make the same mistake as Pharaoh, to condemn without understanding. Instead, seek to understand that in their view of the world they are acting reasonably. This is certainly not to excuse another view, but to understand what is going on in someone's head. Now, I understand that there are two very reasonable criticisms to this argument, he says. The first is the fact that the CDC's website is hardly hidden. The truth of the pandemic is not a secret, and reliable information is readily available that showcases just how valuable masking and vaccinations are to saving lives. Is it not their fault for actively choosing to ignore this information? To this I respond that yes, the information is indeed readily available. However, as we all know, we are unfortunately also experiencing a second epidemic in this country that has been going on for even longer than COVID, that of deep-seated distrust of the media. As I'm sure anybody who has attempted to argue this point knows, it is incredibly hard to convince someone of anything when they not only dismiss your sources as fake, but can provide their own fabricated claims that have been fed to them, which support an alien reality. To simply dismiss someone as willfully ignorant is reductive, as it ignores their indoctrination against accepting such information. A second criticism is that when one is stuck, for instance, in line at the store behind someone without a mask, they're actively being put in increased danger. Why should one care why they are doing it if the fact of the matter is they are putting people at risk? To this point, I wholeheartedly agree that those who violate public health guidelines deserve a blame for putting others at risk, but I also think that if we want to actually put a stop to this behavior, the why is indeed quite important, as it is the only way to ever get them to change. If individuals are acting this way because they are being convinced to do so by the media they consume, then it is clear we need to push back against said disinformation. In practice, this means a few things. Support investigative journalism. Verify that you're getting your information from reliable sources, and do not share stories of dubious origin. Don't engage with bad faith reporting that simply seeks to rile you up. And if you see your friends or family begin to share increasingly dubious articles, confront them. Implement tochacha, the Jewish art of kind reproach and rebuke. This, I truly believe, is how to address the long-term issues that lead to an anti-masker in the supermarket line. Just as Pharaoh's heart was hardened so he would not listen to Moses, no matter how reasonable his argument, many of us unfortunately know that arguing with someone about masks can feel the same way. Therefore, I ask us to do the incredibly difficult work of looking deeper, even when, in fact, especially when, the person we are trying to empathize with is acting in a way deeply contrary to our own morals. We should do this not to excuse or shift blame away from the perpetrator, but because understanding why they act that way is vital in the effort to prevent such action in the first place. In this case, understanding why people refuse to follow public health guidelines, as difficult as it can be, is the first step to creating change, as it allows us to address and not mask the root of the problem.